Oh, thank you so much. Actually, really, for at one point in my life, I actually wanted to be an attorney to the outside and everything.
It's not too late, girlfriend. Princess, come on. I like it.
Yeah.
We have to work with
Yes. You know, so, um, oh, okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about process. So, one thing that no one's talked about is what happens November 7th when it's a yes and the convention happens. The misconception out there is that, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world, New York State's constitution, it's going to be ripped up, etc., etc. But that's not actually what happens. What happens is, yes, okay, we're going to have a constitutional convention. People start the process of running for a delegate. The convention happens. So that's 2018. You're concentrated on finding the delegates. 2019, because it's a 2-year process, the convention convenes for a year, and the delegates together come up with whatever amendments that they want to come up with. At the end of the day, November 7th, 2019, we the voters get to determine yes or no whether or not those amendments will actually be passed. Now, in 1967, it didn't pass because it was a bundled amendment that was presented before the people, and rightfully so, it was, it did not pass.
Was it all or nothing?
Yes, it was all or nothing. It was
all or
nothing.
they
All
put
or
it-
nothing.
They often call it in the state legislature, because the governor does it to the legislature sometimes when they have to vote on the
Yes.
budget, and they call it, literally they call it the big ugly.
Yep.
It's just say, okay, so you want this for what? You want this for schools? Okay, I'm gonna put this in here, but I'm gonna slip this in here too.
Exactly.
So you take the bitter with the sweet, and you either as a legislator you're put in a position where you say, I'm gonna vote for this, or be accused of not voting for something really good for my district.
Exactly.
And that's what they'll tell your constituents. Well, she could have got it, but you know her.
Exactly. I guess for me, I've been spoiled because in Oregon, I was, again, very active in participating in the process. So I just was really disappointed in New York. But what happened November 8th of 2016 to me? I realized in my Rolodex of contacts, I knew people who were like neighbors of Joe Biden. And so I became actively involved with the Hamilton electors, and we did work behind the scenes to throw the Electoral College, from Donald Trump. And we had some deals that were discussed and agreed upon behind the scenes between the Republican and Democratic electorates. And so there was a big letdown when everyone did not do what we had brokered a deal to do. And so, to me, another example of gridlock and how I, as one person, and the Hamilton electors, there were 7 of us, 8 of us, we tried to not let what happened happen. But the thing is that a lot of us made assumptions. We made assumptions, and a lot of us stayed at home. Not only that, but a lot of our votes got thrown out. In 1997, I was 16, 17 at the time. I spoke at Canaan in front of, it was 5,000 people. And I said then, the right to vote is the key to our future. Today, in 1997, it's ironic, I'm here again, saying that the right to vote, that literally was my speech, the right to vote is the key to our future. We have to actively engage our communities to become like Oregon. I mean, Oregon is a lily white state, but why can't we in New York, why can't we mimic that too? And that is what gets me going and keeps me going, is that we can actively engage our youth. I'm probably an anomaly in my peers, but I remember seeing Martin Luther King's speech at the age of 14. I remembered how I felt when I watched that speech. And I was 14. At 16, I was telling people the right to vote was our key to our future. And now, at 39, I'm telling you the right to our vote is the key to our future. And the Constitutional Convention can be a path towards establishing what we as New Yorkers, as Black New Yorkers, what we dream of. I know for a fact our water, although on paper the EPA tells us New York State has one of the best drinking waters in the city, in the state, in the country, that is actually not true because I worked behind the scenes and I know what actually goes on.
Don't tell us.
I'm just not going to. But the truth is that we could be another Flint. That is the truth. And my son is autistic. He was just diagnosed a year ago. He had high levels of mercury and lead in his system. Okay? We are in an epidemic, a pandemic, whatever you want to call it. Environmental rights almost supersedes our civil rights because if I'm dead, how can I affect change? If my son cannot grow up to be a full functioning human being, how can he, as a Black man, move forward and have equal rights? The right to clean drinking water, the right to education. The other issue for us to think about when we go to the polls to vote, education. So again, my journey as a parent of a special needs child in New York State, in the 90s, I'm sure you know, there was a law that was passed that the appellate court, actually it wasn't a law, it was actually a court case that was passed, and I think it's been the model for a lot of other states in the regards to special education. There were parents, it's called Connor's Law. If you have a child that's a special needs child and you want that child to get the best possible education, the ability to maybe have a chance to be fully functioning as an adult, it's not District 75. That's our, definitely not. My son attends the Rebecca School. The school costs almost $100,000 a year. How is that possible for me to afford that? Well, Connor's Law made that possible. And that says that in New York State, the Department of Education must guarantee every single child the right to equal access to an education. This is something that if we had it in our Constitution, we wouldn't even have to have these court cases, a waste of my tax dollars and my time. So this is what I look at the Constitutional Convention as what could be. Should we live in fear? I believe in November 7, 2019, when the convention should happen, and we have amendments that are proposed.
One more minute.
Should there be any amendments that would strip away rights? We as New Yorkers, I put my trust in our intelligence to know to not vote for amendments that would strip away rights. That's a fact. And I know New Yorkers, we come together when we see our rights, our fundamental rights are threatened. And this could be an impetus for us as a state to show nationally what could be.
Thank you.
So again, I'd like to go to the process. And so again, I love your passion. I'm excited. So hopefully we're going to be able to work together one way or the other, right?
Yes.
But again, I just don't think that this is the platform. So I do believe in all of these reforms that we should have. I just don't think that a constitutional convention is what's going to get us. So let's look at what's supposed to happen the day after. What would happen on November 8th? So if there is a yes vote, what would happen is that we're talking about people being elected, 3 from each of the senatorial districts that we already told you are gerrymandered districts. But what it means is people would have to run, and so hopefully, you know, if it were to come to pass, and I oppose it, but if it were to come to pass, clubs like this would really work very hard to get folks elected. But we don't have to just worry about New York City. Again, we're kind of, you know, even though she and I are on the same side, I want to see the same reform she wants to do. But I don't necessarily think that everybody in New York necessarily would.
Problem.
And that's the problem.
Man.
And so we're talking about senatorial districts. You're talking about 63 of them,
Yeah.
and there's 3 people who'd be elected out of each one of them.
204.
And so it's 189 or something
Right, but with the
delegates,
15,
and then the 15 at-large delegates. So For the 15 at-large delegates, they have to get 10,000 signatures.
Very good.
Which means a lot of times you have to get more than that because sometimes there's these challenges and then signatures fall off. And then for the people who are running in the individual districts, they have to get 3,000 signatures.
No,
And-
it's 1,000 signatures if you identify as a Democrat or
Right, if
Republican.
you
I'm
have a
sorry,
party
3,000. I'm
line.
sorry. I've been doing these debates with a lot of folks who
I know.
identify as independents. You're right,
Right,
sister.
yeah.
So if you identify with a Democrat or a Republican, it would be 1,000. But if I've been doing a lot of these with folks who are outside of that, and they would have to get 3,000. A lot of folks who, again, we would love. Young people who have energy, people who are very committed, and they would be making $79,500 a year.
And
right?
Adrian, it's important to, let me just add to
Yes.
that 3,000, right? A lot of the people, if we're looking at the process and saying we're not happy with it, because the people who are getting in to these conventions are usually party people, they're usually not that kind of party. Although they might be that too.
They're part of the establishment.
They're part of the establishment. So we're talking about getting fresh new faces and the people. You're talking about the 3,000 votes.
And that's
Killer
what we would want to
machines.
see, right? We would want to see fresh
Killer machines.
faces, and we want to see new folks. But the problem is that I just don't think that the way it's set up right now, that we're going to be able to do that. And with the dark money, and we're also living in a post, citizens world, when we're talking about the Supreme Court finding that corporations can give to campaigns. Oh, it's a different world that we're living in right now. It's not to say that it could not have happened, and it's not to say that perhaps if we want to vote to have a convention, or if in another 20 years we're supposed to have a convention, that we can't work towards the steps that would make it something that could be real and something that we could really feel secure that we would have a hand, that the people would really have a say. But that is not what I believe would be happening. And when I think about what's at stake, and when I think about all the rights, and when I think about all the protections, people talk about public education, and it is true. Our schools are failing us, but what the Constitution says is that they are supposed to provide for a public education for individuals. And part of what was on that slate in 1967 that failed was where there was this amendment to have the parochial schools to be able to get a lot of funding. And that's what we easily could see. You could imagine that there would be parochial schools and charter school folks who would want to reach in and say that they should get even more public monies or get public monies to be able, and it siphons off from the public school education that so many of the folks that we care about and that I know that I've made my career representing have to rely upon. So again, I am saying that we should be pushing and demanding reforms. And I'm also saying that there have been times that we've been able to do that and succeed. And I know because I've been part of those campaigns. Again, this is not just me making stuff up. I have spent my career on these things, on these matters. But what I'm saying is that it is foolish when you think about the risk versus the rewards to think that a constitutional convention that we would have in 2017 would be the vehicle for it.
All right. Thank you both again. This is a lot of information, but it's a lot of good information. And I must say that, and this is not tooting our horn on this, but we have quality presenters today. We really do, that are giving us the meat of the issue, on both levels. It's a difficult choice that we have to make. And unfortunately, we find ourselves in this position a lot in our community, when we're choosing this over that. And I think you put it, the risk over reward. It's not comfortable, but we have to do it. It's not comfortable, but we have to do it. So I'm going to get to some of these questions because y'all got great questions, I tell you. I'm going to do them, you know what, I think I'm going to do 3 at a time because I think we can. Some of it has been covered, and I'll just, either of you can answer on these 3. But this one, number 1, does New York constitutional laws and articles, no pun intended, trump United States constitutional laws and articles?
No. Well, the federal Constitution always supersedes your state rights, although there have been many constitutional cases that have come before the Supreme Court to determine state rights versus federal rights. It's always a seesaw. but ultimately, at the end of the day, the U.S. Supreme Court and the U.S. federal Constitution always supersedes usually your state constitution in regards to like bargaining rights and pension rights. The United States, the U.S. Supreme Court is actually hearing a case right now called Janus versus I think it's in Wisconsin. Anyway, the issue at hand is not whether or not people have the right to create to the collective bargaining, to have collective bargaining. The question is whether a union member can opt out as far as paying their dues if they do not support what their union is actually doing. And so that is the question now before the U.S. Supreme Court. Whatever happens in that case will actually affect New York State, which is why the unions are spending so much money against the Constitutional Convention, because for them, and this is like inside information that I have known, and for them, it is actually cost effective for them to spend money against the Constitutional Convention, because should it come through, the amount of money that the unions would pour into supporting delegates would actually supersede that. And so they just made an economic decision, which was made in 1997 again, when the unions ran the same campaign, that your pensions would be threatened, and that's not true.
So it is true. So let me just, the pension issue is kind of an issue that I'm upset about a little bit. So we had a couple of the major law firms that sit on my board actually helped us with some research, and of course the unions have already done their research. There's a misnomer about this whole thing of the pensions. Everyone wants to talk about Article 1, the contracts clause of the federal Constitution, saying that it protects pensions. It does protect private pensions. Now, DC 37, you know, when we're talking about 1199, public pensions are not protected by the federal Constitution. So the problem is that yes, some public pensions actually could be at stake, and there is federal law that has been litigated, but there's a 4-pronged test that's extremely complicated, and you have to meet all 4 prongs to think that a public pension would be protected. And right now, those are some of the issues that are before the Supreme Court. And it's just not a guarantee. It's not ironclad, and it's very difficult. And when we're moving again, you know, a lot of what the unions are looking at, and, you know, I actually have 2 union shops that work for, who represent our lawyers. Our lawyers are the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys. They have a private pension, but, you know, they're affiliated with United Auto Workers. And then our social workers, yes, our social workers and paralegals.
What I'm trying to tell you is they're trying to break and take away the union. I was a union delegate.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Right, because right to work, which is a misnomer, the whole
All right.
the whole right to.
All right.
My co-workers, the reason why the unions don't have as much heavy weight as they used to have, because they voted to get a $10 increase in their check, and a lot of them lost their job.
Okay. Thank you, Doris.
So my point being that, you know, we're living in a time when you have so many states that are right to work states, which is a misnomer. Right to work states basically mean where it's a situation that's set up where unions are like, you know, they're going bye-bye, right? Because the state is saying that they don't have to recognize any unions and the collective bargaining that goes on. And so what's happened in Wisconsin, and, you know, we know South Carolina and all these other states being work to right states and going in that direction, a lot of it has been because legislators have wanted to break a lot of the public pensions, because they thought that because of tax cuts and because of other decisions that they've made, they can no longer afford those things. So it is at stake, and it is a big deal. And it is something that the unions are very upset about. And they should be, because, you know, when you think about Bethlehem Steel, and it was big cases that we learned about in law school, there were lots of people who were hurt many years ago when corporations would go and they would be in states where they were no longer responsible for keeping people's pensions up.
No, that's the last of the long answers. We're not going to answer any more questions like that. Okay? Because we got a lot of good questions. We really do. And I'm going to ask you, if you've sent me a question or if you haven't, write it down and send it up. I can't have everybody, and y'all all have great things to say, and I appreciate it. But we got to get through this, and if we have time at the end, we'll say some more. But for right now, write it down on a card. You see Veron? Wave your hand, Veron. She's walking around. If you need a card, ask her. You see, I'm recruiting you, Nyla. Okay, and she'll also help you if you have a card and you want to write a question down. You can write a question down, but we're gonna ask the ones we have. How would the Constitutional Convention be regulated in regards to the people having a voice? We're going to combine that with whenever this convention happens, how do the people be involved? They're sort of the same question. So who wants to take that?
Repeat the question.
Okay. How would the Constitutional Convention be regulated in regards to the people having a voice? And a similar question is, whenever this convention happens, how does the public have a voice? Or do they?
That's very good. Those are very good questions. So, if you're elected a delegate, here's the misconception too that's out there that it's a lifelong position or something along the lines of being an elected official. It's not. It's only for 1 year. 1 year and that's it. And you get $80,000 is your pay. So, to being a delegate. 1 year. So somehow in between being
I'm gonna get my resume done.
so somehow I want to just take us again to the year 2018. All of our legislative bodies are now running for re-election. At the same time, we're going to have delegates. Never has there been a more open time for us, the people, to be involved in the Constitutional Convention as now. Because, once again, 2018, all of our representatives are up for re-election. No one's going to have time to dedicate to running as a delegate. This is true. It's an economic fact. They're just not going to pour money into that. So this is an open door for you and I to actually run. I'm planning to run in my district in Brooklyn as a delegate, and getting 1,000 signatures is actually a great impetus for you to get out there, get your name out there in your community, and run on a platform. This is how you get civic engagement. And this is how the Constitutional Convention can be open and really be a people's convention and not an incumbent's convention, so to speak. So we are at a crossroads right now. 2018 is our year to make it happen.
William, do you know the month that would take place at the same time of the election?
Probably September.
Probably September, same time?
We just don't have the money.
To do, separate times, right?
Yeah. And outside of that,
Mhm.
you know, it's up to the governor to decide
when it's gonna
outside
be.
those months.
Yeah. See, because
It's
I'm not so
very
sure.
fluid. It's
Yeah.
not real rigid. It actually could even take longer than a year if you
Yeah,
wanted
it could
to.
take. You only get paid for a year,
Right,
but
and
it could take longer.
There's no rules as to how they're presented. So you all heard in 1967 was presented as one big slate.
Yeah.
But some folks could decide that they're going to have maybe
Yeah.
smaller uglies, like
Yes.
good stuff, but there's some bad stuff here,
Right.
and great stuff and really bad stuff here, and then you have to. They make up the rules. The folks would make up the rules, and then I also worry about who really is going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And that's
For some people, I got some really dynamic young people who work for me at the Legal Aid Society. They're 22, 23 years old. They're organizers or they're paralegals. And maybe they'd want to do it, but I would say, well, I don't know that I'm going to give you a leave of absence to do that for a year.
Exactly.
I don't know that you're going to have a job, whether this lasts a year or a year and a half, to come back to. So it's also going to be who
And it
thinks
might
they
be
can
a
do it.
conflict.
People who are retired, maybe people who are already elected officials, and they get to have 2 salaries.
Yeah.
There's a range of things, and so there's some great stuff that can happen. And I'm glad my sister said she would run. And I'm hoping that other folks could do it. But there's some of us who work for jobs, and I got all these great young people, but I don't necessarily know that I could spare them having to leave me for long periods of time and still keep their job open, because we got work to do. I'm a nonprofit. I need all hands on deck.
But using that logic, when would we ever overcome? I mean, we are in the civil rights. We are literally again in the civil rights movement. So when are you going to step outside of your paycheck and think about? I did that last year. when are you gonna be able to step outside of your paycheck?
Okay, hold that point. Both of
No,
them.
wait, real quick,
You
she's
won't
a
let
good
me say
point.
this. You
No,
won't let
she's
me
a
say
good,
this.
it's a good point. No, her point is very valid.
Yeah.
That's the reason why we should have 20 years ago
Started
gotten some
this
real good
discussion.
rules
I know.
Yes.
about how it was going to work so we could support folks who need to do it. Because it's too
Well,
much
Ma,
to think.
y'all
One
gonna
question.
do.
One
I need to
statement.
add
I just
something.
wanna say, this is when you step out on
All
faith,
right.
but yet this is where you get your Mercers and your Cokes who will have those individuals set up already, who can take that year off.
But
It's
here's
just
something
that
else.
simple.
But here's
It won't
something
be
else.
like the average job.
But here's something else I want to get to that she said that I think she might not be correct about. You just may not be correct about this. It may seem like legislators will not be able to run for Baltimore. But trust me, they will. It's not even about the money, not even the Mercers. It's about organized, they have organizations. It's about the establishment. People are gonna go with name recognition. People are gonna go with I've experienced it. People are gonna, so don't, it seems, and a perfect world, it should be that.
It's gonna be a little bit of both.
Right.
Those elected officials who can do it, who wants to do it, but do not forget those people. This is really, that delegate is gonna be run by people with money.
Yes,
Period.
yes, that's a
Let's
part
not
of it.
forget, okay? That thousand
But
votes,
even what
that
she
petition
thinks
with
about,
those 1,000 names, that's gonna require
yeah,
someone
money.
with recognition who's gonna be putting their name on
There you
every
go.
post for every
There you
event.
go.
That's money.
There you go, that's money. That's money. And
Don't be silly now.
And our elected officials are not immune
Yeah.
from getting that
And they're
money.
not.
Okay, this is what I'm trying to get out,
I get
is
you,
that
ma'am.
we got
I'm not trying to hold
people.
you up.
No, you're doing good. I like what you're saying. Come on now, you're my co-leader. I love it. But we're all right. But I just don't want you to think for 1 minute, and it is unfortunate that the process. Okay, it is unfortunate that part of this problem is that what we're essentially saying is you need to go a certain way because we can't trust the process. You know, and
Can I just give like 2 examples? So I had 2 friends in my life who moved on to become mayors of major cities, and they were literally like me. One is now the youngest mayor of the city is Vancouver, Washington, and my other friend, Sam Adams, he was the first openly gay mayor of a major city in Portland. These people came like me from the ground up, knocked on doors. I don't see why we can't do it here in New York City. Again, why can't we be interactive? Why can't we as voters, why can't we be engaged? Why can't I say I want to run as a delegate and you be supportive and say, okay, I'm going to throw X amount of volunteers. I know what it takes to make, for instance, in Oregon, I needed to get 238,000 registered signatures for a particular initiative to get it on the ballot. I and my partner, we organized, we got the required amount of signatures on the ballot. It takes a team of volunteers and also paid positions to make it happen. And it's important to get your community behind you. 1,000 signatures is not a lot of signatures. It is minuscule. And I or you can go out and get those required votes. So it just really needs our community behind saying, yes, we can. Yes, I can. Yes, you can. And anyone can be
Yes, we
a
can.
delegate.
And you know what?
Exactly.
And
We need
again,
those
let me
20
just
years.
say, just really quickly, I completely agree with her. Absolutely. But this is the problem. We're talking about 63 districts, 3 delegates each. So you know what? New York City might have a lock. But New York City having a lock because all of us times 10,000, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen in Erie County and with their center. So my issue is that yes, and this is what I was saying to the city bar. So I belong to all these different bar associations. You know, it's just part of my job. I'm so sorry. And I was sitting with a whole bunch of